Howdy folks, this is a history lesson following up on the one about India from a couple days ago. So you should probably make sure that you've watched that one before this one, just so that you have an idea of our background, because we're talking about the Middle Ages in India. And today we're going to talk about monks in India in the Middle Ages. So remember the monks from England? Instead of having families, they lived together in monasteries and spent their life working and praying. And they did a lot of the bookmaking in England during the Middle Ages, in those scriptoriums where they wrote every day. Well, in India, there were also monks. These monks were followers of a man called Buddha, who was an Indian prince who left his palace a long, long time ago and chose to live his life as a beggar, and taught that anyone, no matter what their life was like, they could find happiness by just choosing to lead a good life. That's like this big summary of that. In England, the monks were living in buildings made of wood or stone. But in India, they lived near mountains for the most part and carved their monasteries right into the sides of the cliffs if they were close enough to a mountain to do that. And so they'd have a big cave where they met and did like their big gatherings with stone tables, and then little caves surrounding it where each person could go to be alone and, sleep or meditate or think about things. And passageways and little stone bridges would connect all of these caves together. So it was kind of the same sort of life, but with a different religion based around it, and with a definitely different setting than the monks in England had. Now, these monks in India spent years building their monasteries. They didn't have dynamite or explosives to carve out their caves at the time, so they'd hack trenches into the rocks with iron tools and then put logs in the trenches and then fill the trenches with water. And as the logs would soak up the water, the wood would swell and push against the sides of the rock and crack it, and then they could go back and dig it out again easier. So it was kind of like an old school way of dynamiting something, but with a lot more work, since you'd have to dig the trench, put the log in, fill it full of water, and then wait while it swelled up the wood and made little tiny cracks in the rocks. Once the caves were all carved out, then the monks started decorating them. And they'd carve away at the walls with teeny tiny chisels to make these beautiful sculptures that covered the stone walls. Some of those sculptures were religious in nature, showing like the life of Buddha and some stories from the religion. And then there were also these big giant elephants that were carved, like elephants made of stone as big as real elephants would be, standing outside of some of these caves. And in one of the caves, they even went and made the ceiling carved so that it looked like wooden rafters. Like if you're in a building that has the exposed beams when you look up, it's kind of an old style that people do sometimes because it looks cool now. If you're in something like a cabin style, sometimes you'll see those. So they carved what looked like wooden rafters in their ceiling out of the stone just to make it look cool. In other caves, they decorated by doing this type of painting called making frescoes, which is where you take the stone and cover it with plaster, and then instead of letting the plaster dry, you paint in the plaster while it's wet. So imagine having like a puddle of wet kind of like goo and then trying to do a painting in the goo. And it's up on a wall instead of flat. I bet that was some pretty hard work. But the cool thing that happened is that then when the plaster dried, the paint was stuck in the plaster. And so it ended up saving the colors for a lot longer than if the paint was just on a flat, dry surface. Some of those still have nice color in them now because of the method that they used making those frescoes. And you couldn't do any like taking something back, because once you put the paint in that plaster while it was drying, there was no way to get it back out. So there was no choice of making mistakes and undoing them in that work. Now, these caves are called oh no, I forgot how to pronounce it. Ajanta Caves. There we go. I looked it up. The Anjanta Caves. And the monks lived in them for years and years, and then eventually started getting sick of living there over time and moved to other monasteries, and the caves began to be used less and less, and people started to forget that they were there. Only a few people a year would travel to go see the caves. But over time, again, they became rediscovered. Some soldiers were out hunting in the area long after everyone had basically forgotten the caves existed. And they were tracking this tiger, and looking for the tiger tracks, they stumbled upon the entryway of this cave. and walked inside, and there's these giant stone elephants and carvings of Buddha and beautiful frescoes, all just left there abandoned because everyone forgot they were there. Imagine that feeling. Think about you're out like exploring in the forest and stumble upon a cave that is full of this amazing artwork that clearly took people hundreds of hours to do. That must have been a really cool experience. Those soldiers went back and told everyone they knew, and everyone came to see the sculptures and frescoes, and hundreds of people would come and visit every day. And at that point, some of the people who were visiting were not treating things respectfully, and they'd like break off pieces of the elephant carvings to take with them, or carve a chunk out of the fresco on the wall so they could bring it away, and take those bits to go put in museums sometimes, or even to keep for themselves. Before all of those sculptures and paintings got destroyed, however, the government of India put protection to keep them safe. So some of those things are still there. Visitors can now go and see these caves with the work that the monks did so long ago. And enough of it is still preserved that it's a neat place for people to explore. It's thousands of years old now, and you can still go and see that work. Maybe that's something you'd like to explore this afternoon. I'll leave in the description section a written out word that will tell you how to spell the cave's name so that you can go track it down if you want to see if you can find some pictures of what's going on in there. Maybe you'd like to do a comparison between what you know of how the Christian monks in England were living compared to the Buddhist monks in India. They have some things in common, but some things that were definitely different. Maybe you want to just go explore some of that art. Maybe we can find a way to do frescoes at home using something different than plaster, something a little easier to get a hold of. I'll look into that. But for you, find a way to follow up on this. Have a good day. And we're getting really close to the end of the year, my friends. So don't let yourself get super lazy. Still do some good work for these last couple days. And know that I miss you and hope to see you soon. Bye, everybody.